Now, the Canucks are facing off against the Minnesota Wild. And I think the Wild, for me, were one of those teams that, yeah, I don't really know how much of a chance they had in the playoffs. They traded Jason Zucker at the deadline or just before the deadline. So it looked really like they were selling. So how do you see Vancouver matching up against the Wild?
It's going to be a close competition, and it is going to it's going to be a really interesting matchup in the sense that you have teams that are the two clubs are almost polar opposites. You have Vancouver, who's a young up and coming team who they have elite players at every position. They're electric offensively. They're very sloppy defensively. And it's a team that's going to live and die, I think, by its power play. And then you have the Minnesota Wild, who they play a much more structured game. They don't have the star talent that Vancouver does, but they have a lot better depth, really good blue line. But again, they don't have the best help between the pipes between Devin Dubnyk and Alex Dallock. And again, they don't have any offensive game breakers. So really, it is going to be, I think, a classic example of defense versus offense in this type of series.
Do you think, because, as a Toronto fan, I saw this a whole lot, especially with the up-and-coming team, and that, on a lot of nights, the Leafs really relied on Frederik Andersen. Do you see the same with if Markstrom's not on his game, they're going to have issues?
Absolutely. It's I actually made the comparison on, I think, Toronto radio a couple months ago, where I see a lot of similarities between the Canucks and the Leafs from a stylistic perspective. Obviously, Toronto has more talent and is further along in the rebuild process, so they're just naturally at a better stage than the Canucks are right now. But again, stylistically, there are a lot of similarities in that. A very fun and exciting team to watch, lots of offensive talent, but you are going to have a lot of back and forth play. And because of that, both clubs are going to be really reliant on their goaltending. Of course, Toronto with Freddie Anderson and the Canucks with Jacob Markstrom. And the type of performance that Markstrom gave the Canucks, I think if you look at a lot of their proprietary analytics that account for the defense in front of him, you look at ClearSet Analytics or SportLogic. A lot of these models projected Markstrom as a top 5 goaltender this season, and really from having watched him, he put together an MVP caliber season, and he papered over a lot of the team's defensive deficiencies. So absolutely, the Canucks are going to be really reliant on Markstrom in this series.
They've been off for about, I don't even know how long it's been. It feels like it's been years, but it's probably been like 2.5 months at this point. Do you think there's a benefit for them being off the last 2.5 months?
Yeah, that's something that I've tried to think about over the past couple of weeks, and I can see pros and cons. I think Vancouver is one of those clubs where they might actually benefit because not necessarily from obviously the injury front matters. They're going to get Markstrom back, who I imagine he would have been ready for the playoffs if it had happened in April, but just down the regular season stretch, obviously he was out and Demko was taking over the reins as the starter, so that really helps. But I think also from some of the specific players that they have, you look at Alex Edler, for instance. I know for veterans, it's people are expecting that they're going to have a little bit of trouble getting back up to speed. But in Edler's case, he's an example of a player who, through the first 6 weeks of the season, he provided legitimate top pair value. But as the season went on, he kind of eroded and he kind of lost his legs. And he got tired over the course of the year with the type of workload that he was carrying. So I think this type of layoff could really, really benefit him a ton. And in that type of a context, it would be a massive boost for Vancouver's defense if Edler's at the top of his game. And then elsewhere, Vancouver's obviously got their young players like Hughes, like Pettersson. I think Besser is one of those players who may struggle with the layoff, especially given how little he played during the regular season. But overall, I think the Canucks will stand to benefit from the layoff relative to a lot of other clubs. I'm not as familiar with Minnesota's situation, but Again, a little bit more of a veteran team that kind of caught fire later on throughout the year that might actually impede their momentum. So if I'm Vancouver, I don't mind the layoff given the circumstances involved.
Is there any word if Michael Ferland will play at all in the play-in round?
Yeah, it sounds as if he is skating, that he is recovering, and if things do go well over the next several weeks, it is expected that he'd be eligible to play in the series. Now, there are two questions to ask here. One is he actually going to be healthy enough to play, go straight from training camp into a play-in series? And that's an important question to ask because I believe it was a November or December contest when he first came back from his concussion, and he played just a few shifts against the Leafs, and he was out. And then a few months later, we again went through the same process where he was cleared to play, went down to Utica for a conditioning stint, and again, after a few shifts, was back out of commission. So with concussions, it's always tough to know how a player is going to respond upon actually returning to game action and just the speed and physicality of the game. But also, the second question is whether Ferland actually fits in right now, because you are taking a definite risk because of the first factor, not to mention that when Ferland did start the season with Vancouver, he started on the Pettersson line, didn't really fit there, was moved further down the lineup, and if you look at his October minutes, they were steadily declining, and he just seemed out of sorts, kind of finding his way. His puck touches were very rusty, wasn't very good defensively. There was certainly an adjustment process happening there, and it was tough to see exactly where he was fitting. So because of that, and given the logjam that the Canucks do have, unless the coaching staff is going to be 110% confident that Ferland is ready to go at his peak game, there's going to be a risk to inserting him into the lineup, period. So for me, I expect that he'll be healthy and cleared to play. Whether he actually does get inserted into the lineup, that I'm less confident in.
So if you had to make a prediction right now, who wins the series?
Yeah, it's going to go right down to the wire. Again, I think a lot of it is going to depend on the goaltending that each team receives, because Minnesota down the stretch, Stalock actually stabilized, and because of that, when you couple that with Minnesota's strong defensive play, they went on a tear, especially given how Kevin Fiala emerged as a game breaker. So I think goaltending is going to be a huge part in the series. My guess, and it really is just a guess because anything can happen in the playoffs, as we all know. I lean towards Vancouver in 5. But the margins are razor thin. Like if I were to lay a probability on it, in terms of who wins the series, it'd be like a 55-45 split. It could really go either way here, and there isn't a huge disparity in the teams' respective ability level.